Ruth, why don't we come over here and just do these doors right here in Vernon?
For Vernon.
It's 11 weeks from the November election, and across the country, political organizers are going door to door.
Okay, let's go.
And I'll keep walking this way?
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
So, Sasha, ¿quién cogió Vernon? ¿Quién cogió Vernon?
These organizers are trying to get people to support issues that they care about.
So whatever you think. So it only takes 2 minutes. Is that okay with you? Yeah. Okay, great. So,
And this scene, it's happening in Florida with Alex Berrios. He's an organizer with Mi Vecino, Spanish for my neighbor. Alex is there in the summer heat talking to Osman Nasco, who's 50 and lives near Palm Beach.
that can do it. So this November, there's going to be a couple of initiatives on the ballot. The first one it's a bit controversial, so I'm just going to start with it. It's around abortion and healthcare. As a father,
Alex and Mi Vecino are trying to mobilize people around abortion, specifically an initiative on Florida's November ballot called Amendment 4. It would reverse Florida's 6-week abortion ban and put abortion protections in the state constitution. So Alex asks Osman what he thinks about abortion.
I mean, there are no bad opinions. There are no wrong opinions. It's important to know what people think.
Osman replies in Spanish.
No creo que sea algo normal, tú sabes que sea legal, que tú sabes que decidan por tu cuerpo, que decidan por ti. No. I believe so. That's gonna come so new.
Osman says he doesn't agree with Florida's abortion ban, that it shouldn't be legal for politicians to decide what you do with your body. He says, yeah, he'll vote for Amendment 4.
It matters.
Before Alex was a political organizer, he was a boxer. And he says he takes what he learned in the ring to these sensitive face-to-face conversations.
You have to be uncomfortable. You have to become familiar with your own weaknesses and addressing them and aware of them. You have to work hard and you have to put in real work. In the ring, there's nowhere to hide. And on election day, there's nowhere to hide. There's going to be an election. Votes are going to be cast. And if you did the work or you didn't do the work, it's going to become apparent in the ring or on election day.
Florida is just one of a number of states putting measures on their November ballots that would enshrine abortion as a constitutional right. Passing these measures takes a lot of door-to-door activism around a really personal issue. So Post reporter Molly Hennessy-Fisk went to Florida to see how groups like Mi Vecino were organizing around Amendment 4.
I wanted to be there when they were having these conversations about abortion because I was interested in how they talk about it, both in English and Spanish, because in some countries, in some Latino communities, there's been a lot of stigma around even just discussing abortion or even using the term el aborto. A lot of times the words people will use are vergüenza, shame, pecado, sin.
Molly went to Florida before Vice President Kamala Harris became the Democratic presidential nominee. Harris has been a vocal supporter of reproductive rights. But in Florida, Molly saw how deep-seated people's views on abortion are, no matter what conversation is taking place nationally.
And so to be having these conversations at a doorstep with strangers was very interesting to me. Like, how does that play out? And will people just shut the door and not even want to talk about it? And it was interesting to me that while I was there, not a single person just shut their door and said, no, I don't want to talk. There were a lot of interesting and at times very personal conversations that happened.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Martine Powers. It's Thursday, August 15th. Today, my co-host Elahe Izadi talks with Molly about her time embedded with grassroots groups and how organizers were reaching out to Latino voters in Florida as they pushed to protect abortion rights.
Molly, before we get into what you discovered in spending time with these organizers and the conversations that they were having with voters, can you just tell me a little bit, what do I need to know to understand the landscape regarding abortion in Florida right now?
So we saw with the fall of Roe v. Wade that a lot of states had trigger laws that took effect. Florida law has changed since then, since the Supreme Court decision on abortion. And it's gone from being a 15-week ban to, as of the beginning of May, a 6-week ban. And this ballot measure would expand abortion access by making it protected, reproductive rights protected as part of the state constitution.
So when it comes to these groups that are canvassing voters in Florida, who are these groups? What are they called? And what is their mission right now?
So there are a lot of Latino voters who are not affiliated with a particular party, or they're what's called low propensity voters. They don't vote that often, or they haven't voted in more recent elections. And so their votes are seen as in play, in particular on the abortion referendum. And some of these organizers are really trying to target those unaffiliated voters, undecided voters.
And how big is the Latino electorate in Florida?
So Latino voters are about 18% of the electorate, but that also assumes that they turn out, right? So part of what organizers are focused on is not only talking to them about what they're going to vote for, but how they're going to get out and vote, whether they're signed up to vote by mail to ensure that they do actually vote.
We don't care if you're a Democrat. We don't care if you're a Republican. A political affiliation is just a little letter next to your name on a voter file with the supervisor of elections, right? It means nothing.
This is Alex Barrios again, one of the founders of Mi Vecino.
At the end of the day, we're all people. And especially when it comes to Latino people, we have a lot of common ground. As much as there's a lot of nuance and diversity within the diaspora, Mi Vecino focuses on finding what we have in common.
And for someone like Alex, I think this effort is really personal.
I think, growing up, I was very limited. I grew up very poor. I grew up in an abusive environment. I didn't have options. I didn't have choices. And I've worked really hard to provide a life for my son and options and choices that I never had. And what I've seen in the state of Florida is all that hard work being stripped away with the stroke of a pen here and the stroke of a pen there. I just won't accept it. I won't stand for it. And I'm going to do anything I can to change it.
So Molly, can you walk me through what a, day in the life looks like for these organizing groups? Just set the scene a little bit. What does an average day look like for them?
Well, it depends on the group and where they are. I can say Mi Vecino is one of, if not the busiest, and they have a pretty regimented schedule.
All right, and does everybody have your turf assignments?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're all set?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's go. Okay, everybody.
So they're going out all day. They're out on holidays because they say that's actually a great time to catch people because they're home and doing cookouts. And so they'll go and see them and chat with them there. And they have a map of what they call their turf, which is the area they're assigned to go visit that particular day, houses that they need to hit. I was going around canvassing with Alex, and we came to an apartment building, and a young woman answered the door with her little dog, and her name was Naomi Rojas. She was 20. She's Puerto Rican Dominican. And when they asked her about Amendment 4, she talked about her thoughts about abortion.
As a Latina, I do think that that's important because
And she was talking about her experience and how she'd had a recent pregnancy scare. And it really drove home to her the fact that a 6-week ban like Florida has on abortion doesn't leave much time for a person to even figure out that they're pregnant, let alone make the decision.
I remember that I went to Planned Parenthood and they told me, okay, you're going to take a pregnancy test now and we're going to see what we get from that. And then I want you 3 weeks from now to take another one. And I'm like, dang, what if I really was pregnant and then 3 weeks from now is already too late for me? Because it's only 6 weeks. And it's like, that's so nerve-wracking. I know.
And as we were talking, she said, this not only had an impact on her, but she was also having conversations with her mom about it because her mom was opposed to the ballot measure, but she felt like her mom didn't really understand it, and she was trying to get her to understand better. And she said that there are these complicating factors, right? Like that she and her mom had lived in a shelter at one point.
I just welter and stuff. So we saw a lot of women that, had a lot of issues with their kids and like their housing and everything. And a lot of them weren't ready to be mothers.
This was something she was reminding her mom about, that when you talk about abortion, it's in the context of what people are going through, and that you need to remember why people are making that decision or the different things that they're taking into account.
Well, it's interesting because hearing what you're saying about the canvassers and people like Alex Berrios, they're going out, they're wanting to have conversations with all different types of voters. And, this assumption that, this is at a political level, that for Democrats, this is a harder issue for them to reach Latino voters on. But here you have Alex Berrios, who isn't trying to convince them to vote one way or the other when it comes to a political party, but is talking to them about an amendment. I'm just wondering what he has to say about this strategy of canvassing and talking to people on the ground in the Latino communities on the issue of abortion, and whether, Democrats who have been trying to, make this their issue, whether they've done enough there.
Alex Berrios and folks at his group are pretty frustrated that there hasn't been more in-person outreach by Democrats in Florida, especially by the state Democratic Party. They feel like the most effective approach is actually going and knocking on people's doors and seeing people in person and having these conversations. I will say, in the neighborhoods where we were, and the people we talked to were not getting outreach from the Democratic Party. They were not having literature drop. There were not other canvassers going around where we were, which is what the Mi Vecino folks told me, that they are often the only people out in the neighborhoods where they're going. They're the only ones answering voters' questions, explaining the issues to them. A lot of these voters didn't fit neatly into a party box. So Mi Vecino's and Alex's argument is that they are up for grabs and there should be more effort to try to reach them. And I should say, when I visited Florida in June, Joe Biden was still the presumptive Democratic nominee. So things have been changing on the ground in Florida pretty quickly. But Berrios said more recently that he believes there is still a fundamental disconnect between Democrats and the Latino community there. And even if Kamala Harris's campaign put millions of dollars into funding outreach in Florida, that it wouldn't necessarily fix that disconnect.
And so it sounds like Alex and his colleagues feel like a different strategy is needed. This sort of door-to-door approach and talking to people on the ground in the grassroots is not just crucial, but more effective. But I just wonder if he's right and if that's what you went to go to see.
I did. I mean, there's been a lot of buzz around reaching voters more effectively through technology, right? Through text messages and phone calls. And Alex and his group are pushing back against that, saying, using all this tech doesn't necessarily get people to the polls or motivate these undecided voters to get to the polls, doesn't necessarily reach the Spanish speakers or people who are hesitant to engage. So, I mean, what I saw at the doors was a lot of engagement and people who really seemed to care about voting.
All we do is talk to people. That's how you persuade people, and that's how you change hearts and minds, by building a relationship with them. If they don't know who you are, they've never seen you before, they have no reason to believe anything you say. You're just showing up out of nowhere, if you even bother to show up, and telling them who they should vote for and what they should think and why, and also give me your money too. You're not going to succeed with that strategy.
After the break, how organizers navigate these tricky personal conversations about abortion, and what happens when they meet people who disagree with them. We'll be right back.
Molly, I'm so fascinated to hear how these conversations at doorsteps and on front lawns and porches go, because I'm interested in this idea that people can change their mind or think one thing and then maybe reconsider on especially intractable issues like abortion, where people do have such strong opinions. So when these organizers that you are shadowing encountered voters who did not seem to support abortion rights, what was their strategy? How did that conversation go?
Well, I think part of it was drawing them out about why they believe what they believe, or what their interpretation of this particular ballot measure is, and if there was any question there. For instance, the medical complications, if they were aware about the kind of complications people could encounter during a pregnancy, the issues that could come up, the 6-week ban and the things that could come up after 6 weeks, like getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty, but then also talking to people about who they are, their background, what their values are.
¿Y cómo te llamas? Luz.
Luz Santo.
Luz con Z.
So that was Luz Santos. She's 72. She's a Puerto Rican woman who I spoke with in St. Cloud in a mobile home park. We were inside of her mobile home, sitting down, talking. And she's a very religious lady, Catholic. And you could hear her say for her, abortion is a pecado, a sin. And she was pretty absolute about it.
Y es un pecado. Frente a los ojos de Dios, es un pecado.
She says that for her, abortion is a crime and that an unborn baby is still a life given by God.
Para mí es un crimen. Porque es una vida que va a nacer. Es una vida que te dio Dios.
So she's one of those voters, when I talked to Alex and folks from his group, who they are not going to be like revisiting and trying to inform about this, because they feel like she knows, she's made up her mind and she knows how she feels about it. And it's very much, for her, rooted in religion and her idea of personal responsibility and it being a moral choice.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like Alex and his colleagues are not trying to change people's minds who are expressing like such a strong opinion that way, but they're not trying to argue with them.
Exactly. So like when they go back to that neighborhood, they're going to go to visit other people who said they were still making up their mind but wanted more information.
Molly, one assumption that I hear made a lot about Latino voters is this idea that Latino voters are socially more conservative on issues like abortion rights for religious reasons. And I'm just wondering what your reporting actually tells us about that assumption.
Well, there were some voters who I met when I was out there with the organizers canvassing who were very conservative, religiously conservative, and were very anti-abortion. So I should say there were people I met who were like that. But there also were a lot of people who, when I first met them, I sort of assumed, this is going to be an anti-abortion person. A Nicaraguan-American evangelical woman I met in Hialeah Gardens who was adamant, saying this is a medical decision that should be made by someone with their doctor. And only at the end of us talking did she mention she was evangelical. And when I asked her, well, how do you reconcile your religious views with your view on abortion? She said, well, this is not a scriptural question for me. This is a medical issue. And so I thought that was interesting. And then there were also a number of voters I talked to who were very pro-Trump. Like I remember one retired NYPD former police officer from New York, a Puerto Rican guy who was very pro-Trump, but also very pro-choice and said, I stand by a woman's right. It's a bodily autonomy issue, like no negotiation. And so I think the answer is that things are way more complicated than people sometimes assume. There's this broad diversity of opinion within Latino communities. That's what I saw.
I want to learn more about what trends these organizers are seeing based on who they're talking to and whether they're finding, for instance, women or men are more receptive to their message. What did you see and what did they tell you?
Well, what they told me was that Latino men have been very receptive to the message when they frame it in terms of rights, like their right to make decisions for their family or their community's right to make decisions for itself rather than the government taking rights away. In particular, because a lot of folks came from countries where they had, the government was taking rights away, or they're opposed to socialism, to the government regulating medical care, access to medical care. And so there's concern there, and that's part of what a lot of these folks like about America, right, is rights and freedoms. And so when they frame it that way, that's very appealing, or has been appealing, to male voters.
That's just interesting to me that this message, when framed that way, could be really appealing to male voters. And then what did they find with women voters?
So with women voters, they said, and again, they're following the lead of the voters, right, when they have these conversations. So it's the female voters who are taking them more in the direction of talking about personal experience, about economic issues that they encounter, religious or moral questions, just wrestling with the idea of, can I have a child right now in my life? How many children can I have? How you make those family planning decisions or life decisions, and then bringing it back to like their personal experience or stuff that's happened in their family, which the organizer said can be a much more difficult, much more sensitive, personal conversation to have. But it's one that they are prepared to be having. They're just going down like a different road than they would with the male voters, right?
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, this is such a personal thing. I'm also struck by the connections these organizers are having with the different voters, and I'm wondering how much they think about, the organizers, how they think about their strategy depending on the nationality of the voters they're encountering. So does that change the strategy? Are there people from other countries that you encountered in your reporting and you saw that there was a difference?
Definitely. So I think one of the bright line differences between Latino people of different nationalities or come from different country backgrounds is that there's some countries where abortion has historically or still is illegal, and others where it isn't, like Cuba. So when I saw organizers out there talking to them, that certainly came into play. Like talking to some of the Cuban voters, they really got into the rights issue and being able to exercise your rights and having a right to do that and not losing that right, versus talking to some of the Central or South American people. They really talked about the criminalization of abortion and how difficult it is in other places and the things that they or people they know have had to go through versus being here in the United States.
Were there any moments you were witness to where it seemed as if someone might actually be changing their mind, or at least thinking a little differently about abortion and the amendment issue by the end of the conversation?
Yes, there definitely were. And these conversations can be a safe space for people to ask questions about things that they're wrestling with, in particular around issues like medical complications, rape, domestic violence.
Yo pienso que si una mujer sale embarazada, debe tener su hijo. Es lo que pienso yo.
So that's Joan Valdez. He's 48. He's Cuban-American, and we met him in his driveway. And we were talking about his views on abortion. And at first, he was pretty opposed to any kind of pro-abortion rights measure because he said if someone gets pregnant, it's their responsibility. If they didn't want to be pregnant, they shouldn't get that way.
O si tú no quieres salir embarazada, cuídate.
And within that conversation, how did the organizer navigate it? What was she telling him?
So one of the organizers I talked to with Florida Rising, Diane Alarcon, is Colombian-American, and she would share with folks when she was canvassing her story of having had abortions, including one when she was homeless, living in her car with her husband and her 2 children. So she talked a little bit about her own experience in having had an abortion. And so that's the kind of thing where I think people hear that and you can picture it and it complicates things, right? Or maybe it doesn't. You know, she was listening to him and she wasn't telling him he was wrong or challenging him. She was just giving him something else to think about. And I think he appeared to be very receptive to that.
No, 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 eso no lo entiendo, eso yo sé, yo sé.
And you could see that he was starting to wonder and think about it in a different way. And he said he would take another look at the proposal.
So maybe he didn't completely change his mind, but he was considering another perspective. Do the organizers consider that a success?
Yes, this organizer, Diane, did, because for her, I talked to her afterwards, and she said her main goal is just that people seek out more information and educate themselves. And so she feels like whenever she plants that seed and gets people wondering, then they're going to go and do research on the internet or go and talk to someone and sort of mull it over some more. And that's her main goal, is that they educate themselves. And then, whatever conclusion they come to, fine. But she just doesn't want them making uneducated decisions or not voting, not caring.
So we are not that far away from the November election, and this ballot measure will be on the ballot in Florida. How are these organizing groups thinking and feeling about the work ahead of them? What is the work ahead of them? What goals do they have, and how far off are they?
So they need to reach this 60% threshold of voters to succeed in passing the pro-abortion rights amendment. And polling suggests that they have reached that. And Alex Barrios of Mi Vecino says that the work will be basically nonstop for the next few months.
The priority for us is to talk to as many people as possible. Not just because, there's not a lot of that happening, but because it's not happening in the way that it needs to, the way that we're doing it, where we just talk to everybody. We make no assumptions about people. If there's a Trump flag in your front yard, we're knocking on your door. It doesn't matter what flag you have in your yard. It doesn't matter what bumper stickers on your car. We're going to knock on your door and we're going to talk to you.
And Molly, you were with Alex Barrios before the big shakeup in the election where Kamala Harris replaced Joe Biden on the Democratic ticket. So now we have Harris. She talks a lot about abortion rights. It's one of the core issues of her campaign. So I'm wondering, has that focus on abortion at the top of the Democratic ticket, has that affected the strategy of organizers on the ground like Alex Barrios to get this abortion rights amendment passed in November in Florida?
It has. So Mi Vecino has begun to focus more on young voters, and they say they've really expanded their canvas to include 200,000 people whose doors they were not initially planning to visit. So that has been the biggest change for them. They see these young voters mobilizing and excited around Harris in a way that they weren't about Biden. But fundamentally, their strategy is still the same. And they continue to have these conversations and try to get people to vote for Amendment 4 for the ballot initiative in November.
Molly, after spending all of this time with these organizers, speaking with voters on the ground, seeing how these conversations play out, did it change the way that you think about abortion politics and how that is playing out among people on the ground in these places?
Yes, it did. It changed my thinking around the ability to have these conversations. I thought the stigma was much stronger and that people would not be willing to talk about it. It surprised me, people's willingness to discuss it all across the political spectrum. And that was interesting and kind of heartening to me that people can have these conversations. And the organizers said it surprised them too, that they went into it and they had to sort of tamp down the stigma that they had grown up with around not talking about it. And they felt like when they did that, it opened it up. It made it less stigmatized and enabled these conversations to happen, which is what I saw.
Molly, thank you so much for joining and sharing your reporting with us.
Thanks for having me.
Molly Hennessy Fisk reports on red states for The Post. She spoke with my co-host, Elahe Izadi. Before we go, here's one other thing that I'm keeping my eye on. Right now, it is absolutely the best time of year, not only because it is almost my birthday, but because it is fair season. Across the country, state and county fairs are getting underway. The Post's health reporter, Lena Sun, has been at Iowa's State Fair, which runs through Sunday.
People are in a good mood. They're having their picnic lunches. They're visiting with friends. It is really quite a bubbly and chill atmosphere.
But one of the main features at the fair has changed. Nationwide, H5N1, a strain of the bird flu virus, has infected at least 192 dairy herds in at least a dozen states since March. It's also infected 13 people. Officials worry that these state fairs, which gather a lot of animals and people, could lead to a bigger outbreak. So several states, including Iowa, are requiring dairy cows to test negative for H5N1 before the fair. So this year in Iowa, there is a noticeable absence of dairy cows, or at least far fewer of them.
I took a walk through the barn, did not see many udders.
The popular I milked a cow booth is gone. It's been replaced with a booth where you can take a photo with a calf. This kid having her picture taken is not into it. She just bolts. The situation this year has discouraged many dairy farms, like the one owned by Elaine Frank, from bringing their milking cows to these state fairs. They don't want to risk their livelihood. Frank later told Lena it was a tough choice.
I mean, once we got there, I wished they were there, but we were satisfied with our decision. It was what was right for us this year.
Yeah, but you missed them.
Yeah.
That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. Today's show was produced by Peter Bresnan, with support from Ali Bianco and Alana Gordon. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Monica Campbell, with help from Lucy Perkins. Thanks to Susan Levine. Additional reporting provided by Rishma Kirpalani. If you're looking for the latest updates on the big news of the day, check out our morning news briefing, The 7. We bring you through the 7 stories that you need to know about every weekday morning by 7 a.m. You can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.